So let's start. So thank you, Viva Frei, to join me for this special report about the Quebec election. So we'll start with what happened last night. It was really different kind of debate because they were not really facing each other. They were more like arguing on defending themselves on a specific question. My thought so far, I would say that I find that Anglade is using a lot of emotional tactic as using her personal life or using like some, I don't know, I would say like she used like, but this mother needs to choose between this, okay? She's using, yeah.
It was, I mean, I call it identity politics. She was, you know, referring to gender, referring to her history as the child of immigrants, which is fine. I mean, it's her life experience, and we want to get to know who she is. But she came off well, but it did play to a lot of the emotional arguments and not substantive, and a little bit of the Trudeau-esque, Trudeau-ish sort of method of dealing with politics. Talk about gender, talk about identity politics, and so you can sort of skirt around having to deal with the nitty-gritty of policy.
Vous l'avez entendu dans le Vox Pop, il y en a qui doivent choisir entre payer l'épicerie, payer le logement, puis ça crée énormément d'incertitudes puis d'angoisse. 5 000 $ par famille, concrètement. Puis c'est pas un chèque qui va être envoyé une fois, c'est quelque chose qui va être récurrent année après année. La seule chose qui n'augmente pas, là, c'est le revenu de nos aînés. C'est pour ça qu'on a besoin d'avoir une allocation pour aînés de 2 000 $ par année. On va demander aux gens qui sont capables de contribuer davantage, de plus de 300 000 $ de le faire. Ça, c'est ce qu'on appelle une véritable équité. Oui, on est capable de baisser les impôts pour la classe moyenne et demander aux gens qui sont capables de contribuer d'en faire plus. C'est ça la justice sociale également. Puis la réalité, c'est que dans les 4 dernières années, on a pris moins de pharmaciens, moins d'infirmières, moins de préposés aux bénéficiaires. Et le résultat, c'est qu'on a moins de soins et moins de services. Et la population le ressent. Partout, on n'a pas le droit de baisser les bras. On a la responsabilité de trouver des moyens pour vous permettre d'avoir un médecin de famille.
And in the other hand, I find that Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois is always attacking other political party, like leader, as say, stop to fear them, stop to spread the fear, stop using the fear for like against them and to like be able to take over. But I'm just wondering why you're saying that when you do it on climate change yourself.
The two messaging from Québec solidaire, Parti québécois, sent the same. Duhaime was really the only one who is radically different on meaningful stuff. I don't necessarily agree with everything he has to say, but he's my favorite of the candidates, and that might skew the way I see this. And Legault is my least favorite of the candidates. And hypocrite, a policy hypocrite he is on the substantive issues. Nothing but excuses, nothing but deflecting answers, and nothing but basically admitting to government corruption, just concealing stuff from the people that the people have paid for. But we'll get there.
I would say I'm actually not agreeing with Lacac for so many points, but I do say that I agree with the fact that when he's arguing with the Liberal Party and the Quebec solidaire about electricity, they want to use mostly solar and air, like eolian, for creating electricity that is not really sustainable and is not realistic. When Legault say, oh, you will do that, it's impossible. We need more hydroelectricity. I will say that he is right, and he is right when he say that for creating green hydrogen, we need a lot of electricity.
Parce que l'éolien, c'est intermittent. Ça prend des barrages ou du nucléaire. Maintenant, quand Mme Anglade parle d'hydrogène vert, ça prend beaucoup d'électricité, puis elle n'est pas capable de nous dire où elle va prendre l'électricité pour l'hydrogène vert.
Il faut anticiper. Il faut voir ce qui se passe. Aujourd'hui, l'hydrogène vert, c'est partout sur la planète. En Europe, au Danemark, en Angleterre, en Allemagne, ils investissent de manière massive.
Moi, je crois qu'il faut diversifier nos sources d'énergie. On le sait qu'on va avoir besoin de plus d'énergie. C'est pour ça que le Parti conservateur, on est les seuls qui sont favorables à l'exploitation de notre gaz, mais on est aussi favorable à développer plus de filières hydroélectriques, évidemment.
And I even agree with him in principle on the idea that if you tax the oil companies, you tax gas companies, they're going to pass the buck to the consumer. We can agree on that. But actually sticking to the hydroelectricity, they're talking about going green. I mean, the issue is that nobody asks, do we have a problem in Quebec? Like, is there a problem of emissions in Quebec that they're proposing a solution to? Do we not have enough hydroelectricity as it is? I'm asking the questions because I don't know the answer, but I'm wondering do we actually have an energy problem in Quebec? Are we talking about producing more green energy for other provinces or shipping it out? Or are we just talking about reshaping the Canadian energy, the Quebec energy scene, just for the sake of going green when we don't actually have a problem in and of itself?
Yeah, and exactly. It's why I really like the vision of Mr. Duhem, that he see it like globally, like worldwide, that same if Quebec is doing like some effort and some sacrifice for being green, if the rest of the planet is not following the same path, why we are doing that, why we are sacrificing our economy and our life for something that anyway, the rest of the world is not following us.
Well, and not only that, like, even if we implement at whatever cost it's going to be to like have communal transport between Quebec and Montreal or across the province, first of all, does that respond to an actual problem? And more importantly, even if you do it 100% green, what drop in the bucket is that? Canada as a nation globally is a drop in the bucket of global emissions, even if you assume global emissions are the ultimate problem. Quebec, in the Canadian context, is a drop in a bucket. And the cost of what they're implementing and the infrastructure required, it's nice to say you want to go solar power, you want to go windmill. Have they seen what that looks like? Have they thought about what goes into solar panels themselves, the lifespan of a solar panel, where it goes? I mean, we've seen images of the landscape, or as I call it, the hellscape in certain states where you have mountains of solar panels. What happens if there's another ice storm? How does it deal well in Quebec in cold temperatures? And better yet, does it solve any solution? Slap windmills and slap solar panels all over the province. How do you make them? Where do the minerals come from? How do you service them? What impact does it have on the environment? And is it going to be enough on its own, even if you do it?
Et on ne peut pas imprimer des fonds publics pour que ça transite quelques secondes dans le portefeuille des Québécois pour ensuite s'en aller dans les paradis fiscaux, dans des compagnies multinationales.
Est-ce que c'est possible, ça? Qu'est-ce que vous en pensez, les autres? Est-ce que c'est possible de taxer les pétrolières au Québec?
Ben non.
Il y a un prix Nobel. Il y a un prix Nobel.
Voyons donc, si on taxe les pétrolières, ils vont répercuter ça au
consommateurs.
Comment ça se fait qu'on ne comprend pas ça?
Mais M. Legault, comment ça, vous baissez pas les taxes sur l'essence? Comment ça, vous ne comprenez pas ça, vous non plus?
On donne un montant
L'Ontario vient de baisser les taxes, puis ça a fonctionné, M. Legault. Le prix à la pompe en Ontario est moins cher. Pourquoi vous ne faites pas ça? Pourquoi vous ne donnez pas un break aux automobilistes un peu?
Un montant de 400 à 600 $, puis laisser la liberté aux gens. Ça vous dit quelque chose, ça, la liberté?
Hey, I'm gonna talk about like health system. Because the health system, as you know, like it's actually going to collapse. Mr. Legault said that until now, he did give more than 300,000 Quebecois some family doctor. This is untrue. When we look at some people, yes, they receive family doctor, but is actually you get in charge with the clinic and you don't have your doctor, but the clinic will take care of you to change you from doctor when you need it. So it's not like a specific one. So for me, this one was a kind of secret lie, but we'll understand that Legault is good on that.
So it's this one excuse after another to pass the buck. Oh, you know, I've done good, but it takes too long to train these people. And so give us a few more years and we'll do it. Except the problem has been here for 10 years. And when it comes to immigration, we're not focusing on immigration that would bring in immigrants who can satisfy some of these positions because it takes years to train people to fill those positions. It's policy failure through and through. He gets called out on it, and he has to spin it with these bogus numbers to make it look like he's done something good.
But most of them say that, okay, we need to bring the private sector to compete with the public sector. I'm actually agreeing with that because, unfortunately, now everybody will go to the public sector and they have no choice. They have no other option.
No, Alexa, it's the standard sort of, I would say, socialist ideas that it has to be equality for all, even if it's equally crappy for all. They don't want to raise the base for the lowest if it means that the richest or the most privileged or fortunate have better options. So they'd rather keep everybody at level 1 instead of allowing the upper 5% economically to get to a level 5 if it means bringing everyone else up to a level 2. The idea that everyone would oppose a private sector for those who can afford it if it would actually mean freeing up places in the public sector so that those who can't afford it can actually get better service quicker in the public sector, they don't think about it because they just think about equality for all, even if it's equally crappy for all. The idea to allow the private to compete somewhat with the public, it makes total sense. The concern, which is a legitimate policy concern, is that it'll take doctors from the public and they'll go work in the private because it'll be more lucrative.
Bien, pour nous, il faut additionner la contribution du secteur privé. On croit que c'est important de garder l'assurance universelle publique, c'est-à-dire que notre carte d'assurance maladie va continuer à payer pour nos soins de santé, mais si le gouvernement, si l'État n'est pas capable de fournir des soins dans des délais raisonnables, la personne doit faire comme dans un paquet de pays européens, avoir la possibilité d'aller dans un hôpital ou une clinique privée, et c'est sa carte d'assurance maladie qui va payer pour ses soins, et même mieux que ça, si le privé est capable de le faire moins cher que le public, elle peut y aller même avant les délais, elle peut y aller directement. Donc, c'est vraiment d'additionner la contribution du privé pour nous.
Les CLSC, ça fonctionne, il faut les refinancer, il faut en faire une vraie porte d'entrée. Le 8-1-1, ça fonctionne, il faut le brancher sur le système, il faut mettre le cap vers la prise en charge vers la maison. Et pour faire tout ça, il y a un passage obligé. Ramener le monde dans notre système de santé. Puis ça passe par des bonnes conditions de travail, enfin, pour les soignants du Québec. Moi, je pense qu'ils le méritent.
D'abord, en 2018, on a hérité d'un système de santé qui était malade. Ensuite, on a eu la pandémie depuis 2 ans et demi. Et malgré ça, on a réussi en quelques mois à former 10 000 préposés aux bénéficiaires. On a réussi à ce qu'il y ait 300 000 Québécois de plus qui aient accès à un groupe de médecine de famille. Puis, Christian Dubé a déposé un plan complet. Évidemment, ça prend 3 ans à former des infirmières. Donc, il n'y a personne ici qui peut faire de magie, mais il faut y aller graduellement, puis il faut décentraliser. C'est ça qui est le plus important.
And what is your thought about the fact that now, about immigration, they all give different numbers. So we know that Mr. Legault he wants to cap it at 50,000 immigrants. We know that the Quebec Solidaire wants to cap it at 80,000 and the Liberals 70,000. And so my point of view is if we are not stopping Roxham Road and if we continue to take as much immigrant, now they are thinking it's because we have too much immigrants, so we have a problem with the Francisation of the new immigrant. But what about Roxham Road? One person I've mentioned it, and it's the Quebec Party, and it passed like that. Nobody have touched afterwards to that problem that put really a big pressure into Quebec.
Well, the political sleight of hand that has been played is that politicians now use the term immigration and asylum interchangeably. And so the way the public consciousness views immigration now is that it's necessarily humanitarian, it's necessarily asylum, which has never been really the case, or at least as far as I know. But in so falsifying the debate, if you say, look, we'd like to have an immigration policy that works for Canada, everyone's like, well, what about those poor immigrants who need to flee their war-torn countries? We have asylum policies, we have humanitarian policies. Immigration is something different. And immigration is something that it's not a right, it's a privilege. It should be something that works in the best interest of the immigrant and the country into which they're immigrating. And you can have immigration that, setting aside the humanitarian side, there's ways to petition the courts or to ask for asylum. You have immigration that meets the needs of both immigrant and country. Because it does no good having an immigrant come to a country where they are not going to be, or they're going to be a drain, or they're not going to be able to be integrated into the society into which they've immigrated. And you can have immigration satisfy certain emptiness in or open spaces, weak spots in the Canadian economy. And you want to prioritize French. I understand that. Quebec is a French province, and I respect that and support that. But there's a way to make immigration work both in favor of the immigrant and in favor of the country. But people have confounded immigration with asylum right now. So anybody who says, let's have something of a merit-based, need-based immigration system, they think you mean like, well, you know, forget the rest of the war-torn people who need to flee their countries. And it's a falsified debate, which makes for very bad policy.
Ce qu'il faut, c'est pas seulement faire un débat de chiffres sur l'immigration, c'est construire un nouveau modèle d'immigration qui fait les deux, qui ouvre les bras, où on accueille plus de gens au Québec et où on mise sur la régionalisation, sur la francisation en milieu de travail et où on donne la piqûre de la culture québécoise aux nouveaux arrivants, aux nouvelles arrivantes.
Le chiffre, à la limite, c'est pas le chiffre qui est le plus indicateur. Le meilleur indicateur, c'est est-ce qu'on peut, oui ou non, intégrer ces gens-là sur le marché de l'emploi et les intégrer à la majorité francophone. Puis le rôle du gouvernement, c'est de s'assurer qu'ils peuvent apprendre le français et qu'ils peuvent intégrer le marché de l'emploi. C'est aussi simple que ça. Les guerres de chiffres, ça ne mène absolument nulle part. Ça ne fait que diviser les Québécois.
Mais on doit arrêter aussi de pointer du doigt. On doit arrêter de diviser. On doit arrêter de dire que l'immigration, c'est un problème ou que c'est une menace. Collectivement, au Québec, là, on a de grandes choses à accomplir. On est capable de le faire avec tout le monde.
Sur la question du modèle, il ne faut pas non plus tomber dans un tabou où parler des seuils deviendrait interdit parce que c'est lié au déclin de la langue française, parce que le transfert linguistique vers l'anglais des allophones est trop important. Donc, discutons-en de manière responsable pour trouver le juste équilibre au niveau des seuils comme du modèle.
Et on a adopté le projet de loi 96. On a augmenté le pourcentage d'immigrants qui parlent français. On a doublé les cours de français pour les nouveaux arrivants. Mais le premier devoir du premier ministre du Québec, c'est d'assurer l'avenir du français. Puis, pour ça, bien, on a besoin, effectivement, de limiter le nombre de nouveaux arrivants qui ne parlent pas français.
On a accueilli 70 000 nouveaux arrivants aujourd'hui. Donc, on est capable de le faire. Quand M. Legault nous parle de la capacité d'accueil, je ne sais pas sur quoi il la calcule, mais on est capable de le faire aujourd'hui.
À ce niveau-là, il y a un déclin du français, il y a un transfert linguistique vers l'anglais. Nous, on demande que l'immigration économique soit 100 francophone.
Je suis un peu d'accord avec vous qu'il ne faut pas aller comme Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois et Mme Anglade à 70 000 et 80 000. Moi, je pense qu'à 50 000, en régionalisant, en exigeant qu'il y en ait un plus grand pourcentage qui parle français, je pense qu'on peut y arriver.
Mais savez-vous que cette capacité d'accueil-là, on ne l'a jamais définie au Québec? Il y a des démographes qui nous disent c'est 60 000, il y a des économistes qui nous disent 80 000. Nous, on dit arrêtons ces chicanes de chiffres-là, donnons le mandat à un comité d'experts de réfléchir cette question-là et de tracer la ligne entre 60 et 80 000. Ça, c'est une manière de sortir du débat de chiffres.
Je pense que c'est très inquiétant, effectivement, de voir un recul du français. Cela étant dit, il faut regarder pourquoi. Ce pas les francophones qui sont en train de s'assimiler à l'anglais. Je pense que tout le monde a compris ça. C'est pas la faute des anglophones qui ont quand même des droits historiques puis qui sont là puis qui ont toujours été là. Tout le monde le dit, c'est véritablement la capacité de franciser les immigrants. Fait que de dire on va doubler les immigrants, puis c'est pas grave, on va les franciser au fur et à mesure, c'est sûr qu'il faut faire attention. Le problème, il est véritablement là. Les ressources puis l'attention doit être mise là. Puis la régionalisation, c'est beau aussi en théorie. Ça fait des années qu'on entend ce discours-là. Mais malheureusement, puis on ne peut pas reprocher ça aux immigrants. Il y a une attirance naturelle pour Montréal.
80 à Montréal.
Et ça s'en vient vers Montréal. On ne peut pas nier cette réalité-là.
Il faut rajouter un fait.
And it's the same thing with like the law 96, you know. Everybody was for it. Liberal was for it at the beginning. The Quebec Party as well, CAQ as well. And now it seems like Quebec Party just say that no, that will not stop like the decrease of French. And the Liberal Party say that they voted against it. And it's only the CAQ that still say that it's good. It did good and he continued to do good.
Yeah.
But it's just hypocrisy. When you look at that, all the party was in favor, and now just because it's the election and they know that did stigmatize a lot of Quebec people. Now, suddenly it's all bad.
Alexa, it's the parties that follow the science only follow the polls. And they went with this thinking, first of all, I'm convinced the CAC, reintroduced or got back to this Bill 96, which, the version 2.0 of Bill 101, a law that's been on the books for 40 years. If it hasn't helped in 40 years, doubling down on it's not going to help it work in the next 40 years. But it was a great policy decision to go to Bill 96, distract from all the other destruction of our province, and make the language issue the central issue, as though that was the central issue in the minds of Quebecers. And then they see the backlash, which I find ironic. Anglophones, allophones, who didn't care about being locked in their houses, being shut out of their businesses. They didn't care about that for charter violations or constitutional rights, but touched their language. And then they start freaking out. Now they see that it's not popular, and they all just sort of back away from it, like, well, never mind, Alt Control Delete, except for the CAC, who needs this as a divide and conquer tactic to not look at the rest of their bad policy and corruption, which was also somewhat exposed during the debate.
Ce qu'il ne faut pas faire, c'est enlever des droits à la communauté anglophone. Ce qu'il ne faut pas faire, c'est enlever des droits comme ils l'ont fait pour les immigrants également qui doivent apprendre le français. On n'a pas besoin au Québec de se diviser. On est capable de se rassembler.
Madame Anglade, parlons-en. Vous étiez favorable au projet de loi 96. Votre parti a même adopté des amendements qui étaient encore pires que ce que proposait M. Legault. Après ça, vous avez voulu enlever les amendements parce que les anglophones se sont mis à dire « Qu'est-ce que vous faites là? Vous êtes en train de nous trahir. » Vous parlez des deux côtés de la bouche dans ce dossier-là, Mme Anglade.
Run it through their back pockets, take their cut, and then give it back to the old to say, oh, here's $500 on the eve of an election. At one point they were discussing reducing the size of the administrative state. Not hiring more government workers. The government workers, it's not that they're not valuable. It's that they don't generate they don't drive any of the revenue to pay their salaries. That comes from the private sector. There's only so big the public sector can get before it suffocates and smothers the private sector. And the idea that it's an offensive thing to say, let's reduce the size of the public sector, let's have value added at the private, and let's exploit our own, natural resources, our own resources to the fullest extent. No, that's not the solution. And the idea of suggesting, what is the word, austerity? The idea of suggesting that you start, if not laying off public sector, just not renewing, and slowly start shrinking the size of that proverbial blob, that's offensive because there are so many people right now in Quebec who rely on the public sector that it's a threat to their existence to say we're going to shrink it down. And so it's this spiraling effect of the solution is only a temporary solution to exacerbate the problem long term. And it's election. What's the easiest way to buy the votes? Literally buy the votes. Here's $500, here's $2,000, and we're going to invest more. Trust us, we'll get it right.
And it's good what you mentioned, like the size of the state, because I remember that 4 years ago, Mr. Legault said that he will get smaller. The worker at the National Assembly and the size of the state and make it smaller. But since he is the leader, he did increase it. More and more people, politicians and more people are working for the state. And now we spend more money there instead of invest in other sectors that need money.
Look, of course he said that at one point. I didn't hear, I wasn't really paying as much attention 4 years ago, but of course he would have said that at the time because he came from private enterprise. He understands how it works. Then he gets into the public enterprise and he understands how that works. And you don't get the votes of unionized workers, of the unions. You don't get the votes that you need to get reelected by saying we're going to reduce the size of the state. So the solution is always more, tax the private, tax, those making $300,000 or more in the private, bring it into the public. Government takes its cut, government pays its employees, and by the way, the government is the problem in all of this.
Pour ceux qui gagnent entre 0 et 50 000, une remise de 1 200 $ d'ici la fin de l'année. Entre 50 000 et 80 000, 750 $. Essentiellement, on prend les surplus de l'État en raison de l'inflation. On le redonne à ceux qui ont de la misère à rejoindre les deux bouts, mais sans s'attaquer aux services publics et sans faire de cadeaux aux plus riches.
On veut donner 400 à 600 $ au mois de décembre à tous ceux qui gagnent moins de 100 000 puis on veut donner 2 000 de plus à partir de 2022 aux 70 ans et plus, puis après, on va baisser les impôts.
On est le parti qui offre les plus importantes baisses d'impôts de tous les partis politiques à l'heure actuelle et on propose également de suspendre la taxe sur l'essence, justement pour donner du répit aux familles du Québec, pour que ce soit le gouvernement qui se serre la ceinture dans ses dépenses.
5 000 par famille, concrètement. Puis c'est pas un chèque qui va être envoyé une fois, c'est quelque chose qui va être récurrent année après année.
Pas de TVQ à l'épicerie, à la pharmacie, au restaurant, sur les vêtements ou pour faire des réparations, par exemple, de sa voiture.
Legault refused to recognize and accused Duhaime of misrepresenting the fact that Quebec did not have per capita lower mortality during COVID. I mean, Quebec and Ontario had the worst numbers in Canada, as far as I understand. And maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong. Despite everything, we had the worst numbers. Despite the draconian measures, despite all of the government overreach, we had the worst numbers. And then he tries to gaslight Duhaime to pretend that Quebec somehow fared better because of his response to COVID, despite the massive amount of public sphere involvement in that. Spoiler alert, the problem might have been the fact that there was too much public sphere involved in this in the first place, and where we had the problems were specifically in the public sphere. But it's that element of gaslighting, if you can find that clip where he accuses Duhaime, are you not going to admit, it's irresponsible of you not to admit that Quebec had lower numbers, lower mortality, and fared better than the rest of Canada and the world? No, I'm sorry, Legault. That is confession through projection. You are accusing Duhaime of doing exactly what you're doing because Quebec had among the worst numbers despite the most draconian measures.
Yes, and do you remember during the debate when Mr. Duhaime said to Mr. Legault, why do you don't want to admit that your measure, your lockdown, your political decision did create distress and depression on the young people, and Mr. Legault never wanted to admit it, never.
He failed at protecting the vulnerable at the time. I say he, all of Canada, but Quebec and Ontario in particular. Mm-hmm. They failed to protect the vulnerable. They devastated the economy, which is great for Legault because now he can say, look, we've added so many jobs after devastating the economy. They have traumatized and damaged a generation of children. It's been a failure across the board, period, full stop. And he's got to find some way to spin it. And what way to spin it? Accuse your adversary of lying. It'll sound good. And for some people, they might even, for those who survived, they're alive. So they say, yeah, maybe we didn't do that bad in Quebec.
Mais il faut également qu'on prenne soin de notre monde. Puis prendre soin de notre monde, ça veut dire qu'il faut arrêter le temps supplémentaire obligatoire. Il faut l'éliminer, puis faire en sorte qu'on ait des conditions de travail acceptables pour tous nos professionnels de la santé.
Ce qu'on voit, c'est que ça ne fonctionne pas. Les agences privées de placement, ça ne marche pas. Les CHSLD privés, ça ne marche pas. Donc, ce que M. Duhaime et M. Legault proposent, c'est de continuer à privatiser plus. Nous, ce qu'on veut, c'est régler enfin les problèmes de notre système public.
Si le socialisme fonctionnait en matière de santé, M. Nadeau-Dubois, on le saurait. Ça fait 40 ans qu'on a des ministres de la Santé qui se promènent avec des structures puis qui changent toutes les structures. Et pourtant, jamais on a eu des problèmes, jamais on a eu un système aussi inefficace que celui qu'on a à l'heure actuelle. Moi, je pense, M. Nadeau-Dubois, il faut à un moment donné, là, on peut bien jouer encore dans les structures une autre fois ou deux autres fois, là, mais la réalité, là, c'est que ça prend de la concurrence. Vous le savez comme moi, un monopole, peu importe, même s'il est public ou privé, un monopole, ça ne fonctionne pas. Je vais vous donner un exemple bien concret. Là. Un médecin, présentement au Québec, là, il ne peut pas pratiquer et au public et au privé. Hein? C'est illégal. C'est 100% 1 ou 100% 0. Au Québec, on a un système à deux vitesses présentement. Nous, on veut un système à une vitesse. Parce que présentement, les ultra-riches peuvent y aller, mais nous, on veut que tout le monde puisse avoir accès au système de santé privé.
Il manque 6 milliards de dollars par année en santé au Québec. François Legault, avec son fédéralisme de gain dans le Canada, nous avait promis d'aller les chercher. Il l'a demandé par 4 fois, puis maintenant, Justin Trudeau se déplace même pas. Il ne prend même plus la peine. Il répond en 24 heures non. Donc, s'il manque 6 milliards, ce sont des sommes importantes. Et notre relation avec le fédéral, elle doit être nommée. Si on décidait nous-mêmes de nos budgets puis qu'on prenait nos propres décisions comme Québécoises et Québécois, on ne serait pas pris à quémander, comme toutes les provinces canadiennes, des sommes aussi majeures que 6 milliards de dollars. La seule solution à ça, c'est l'indépendance du Québec. Quel est votre choix?
On va continuer avec les autres provinces
à demander au fédéral
l'argent.
5-6 fois.
Puis on a pas mal plus de chances d'y arriver que de faire un référendum sur la
D'habitude, les
souveraineté dans le
indépendantistes
prochain
ont plus
mandat.
de chances. Il faut fermer les agences, mettre fin à l'usage des agences privées et rehausser substantiellement les conditions de travail en même temps, ce que la CAQ n'a pas le courage de faire.
Mais la solution, c'est pas d'abolir les agences privées par la suite. Ça va être encore pire. Il va y avoir encore plus de pénuries. Les filles ne veulent plus travailler pour un aussi mauvais employeur que le gouvernement du Québec. D'où l'importance d'avoir une concurrence des employeurs qui va pouvoir offrir des conditions de travail décentes à ces filles-là.
Très bien.
Legault did accuse Mr. Duhem to use the distress of the people and the hate of the people against the government. Like, do you remember that part?
Yeah,
and I was just like, oh my God.
I think, let me just, you'll be able to edit this out. I want to hear,
Yeah, it's a...
La façon dont, est-ce que M. Duhem a dit tantôt à propos des 2 dernières années, là?
I think this is it.
Parce que M. Duhem, durant 2 ans, il a joué le rôle d'un agitateur.
Un agitateur.
De la souffrance des gens au Québec. Il pense que c'est pas vrai qu'il y a eu moins de décès au Québec.
An agitator who's exploiting of the suffering of Quebecers. Can you appreciate how disgusting an accusation that is? It's an agitator. You know that he wants to imply that Duhem is a conspiracy theorist. You know that it's audacity, bald-faced audacity. It's like 1984 levels lying. They'll just lie to your face, and the more they do it, they think if they keep doing it and keep repeating it, at some point people will believe it. And the reality is that some people are going to believe it. But Duhem was an agitateur qui exploitait la souffrance de la population. Bull crap, Legault. People are suffering, and you're not an agitator for pointing it out to the failed government.
Mais je veux quand même répliquer à ce que M. Duhem a dit tantôt à propos des 2 dernières années, là. Parce que M. Duhem, durant 2 ans, il a joué le rôle d'un agitateur là, qui a profité de la souffrance des gens au Québec. Il pense que c'est pas vrai qu'il y a eu moins de décès au Québec. Franchement, là, c'est irresponsable.
Monsieur Legault,
la façon dont a agi M. Duhem.
Monsieur
Je veux
Legault,
que les Québécois
on parle de santé
sachent.
mentale, là, puis tout ce que vous retombez là-dedans, là.
Oui.
Vous n'êtes pas capable d'admettre qu'il y a un problème de santé mentale. Vous n'êtes pas capable d'admettre qu'il y a eu des impacts à votre confinement. Vous n'êtes pas capable d'admettre que c'est les enfants du Québec qui souffrent à cause de vos décisions.
Est-ce que vous admettez qu'il y a eu moins de décès au Québec?
Non, M. Legault, c'est
Combien
vos propres
vous étiez
chiffres, je
prêt
les ai
à sacrifier?
ressortis. M. Legault, on a plus de morts per capita que partout au Canada. On a plus
Étiez-vous prêt à sacrifier 2 fois plus d'aînés?
Monsieur
3
Legault,
fois plus
moi, je
d'aînés?
ne descendrai pas aussi bas que
Vous avez
Je commencerai
été
pas à dire combien de gens
irresponsable avec nos aînés.
sacrifié.
Irresponsable.
Mais vous avez été irresponsable avec les enfants du Québec, M. Legault. Oubliez jamais ça.
Another point was, I don't know if you remember, but the third link, le 3e lien, this was one of my favorite parts because Mr. Legault still deny and still say that he have a secret study that costs, I think I remember the number, I think it's $38 million, and they say, where is that study? And they say, but we will come, but it's been like 2 or 3 years that you're talking about that, but you have no study.
Well, was it even worse than that? Was it with Le Troisième Lien where he was talking about the fact that they had a study that predated COVID, and now it's no longer, c'est désuet, it's like it's no longer relevant. I wasn't sure if I understood that properly, but if I did, Legault, we already paid for that study. Whether or not it's moot or no longer relevant because of the changing, we get to see that study. But
that study is come from the Liberal Party, not even la CAQ. And that was for a bridge and not for a tube inside of the water. We don't have any study for a tube inside of the water. It's not even done yet.
It is, look, I mean, it's just another, it's another symptom of the government, the way this government operates. They did that study. My understanding is that it did confirm that a bridge was preferable to a tunnel. He says, oh, it's désuet. I don't know if he said désuet, but he said it's no longer applicable because it was done pre-COVID. Things have changed. We paid for that study. We get to see that study. You don't get to hide that study, period. And as for the rest of it, I mean, again, he seems to have his idea as to what he wants for the solution. And to say, we've done studies and I'm not showing them yet, but I've already known the solution and we're going to, it was a convoluted mess. But in conjunction with the way this government has worked, which is granting, contracts to, I won't guess who, but granting contracts in the absence of any meaningful competitive bidding, one can hypothesize as to why he's got a fixed answer for this, and whether or not he's going to continue operating the way he's operated over the last 2 years, basically doubling the amount of contracts that are given out without any meaningful competition or public bidding.
Je lance le débat. Monsieur Legault, est-ce qu'il y a des études ou il n'y a pas d'études?
Bon. D'abord, actuellement, entre Québec et Lévis, il y a 2 ponts. 2 ponts qui sont congestionnés.
Okay.
Il y a une étude qui est en cours parce qu'on a annoncé il y a 1 an qu'on va faire un tunnel de centre-ville à centre-ville. C'est la meilleure façon de faire la promotion du transport collectif
combien coûte votre étude?
entre Québec et Lévis.
Monsieur Legault, combien coûte? C'est qui fait l'étude?
Les gens de Québec et
Lévis, fait l'étude? Combien coûte?
Ont besoin d'avoir un lien. Nous, on ne pense pas qu'un pont qui détruirait l'île d'Orléans en faisant une autoroute sur l'île d'Orléans, que c'est la bonne idée. On a besoin d'un lien.
Monsieur Legault,
et nous, on propose un tunnel.
Monsieur Legault, c'est qui fait l'étude? Puis combien qu'elle coûte, cette étude-là dont vous parlez?
Monsieur,
répondez à ma question.
Il y a une étude qui est faite actuellement. Je ne sais pas
combien
exactement
OK, vous savez pas.
Combien.
Fait que là, est-ce que c'est comme il y a 4 ans quand vous avez dit que vous aviez promis un pont, puis aujourd'hui, vous ne savez plus, vous en souvenez plus non plus?
L'étude va être faite sur un tunnel, centre-ville à centre-ville, avec 4 voies,
ça fait,
pas un pont.
Il y a 4 ans, vous promettiez le même pont que je promets aujourd'hui.
Ouais,
mais Monsieur Legault...
On évolue, tout le monde évolue.
Oui, vous avez évolué, il n'y a rien qui se passe. Vous avez abandonné les gens de la région de Québec, Monsieur Legault. Vous savez même pas qui fait votre étude,
juste finir. Monsieur Duhem, concluez.
Mais ce que je veux dire, là, aujourd'hui, la une du Journal de Québec, là, c'est que le pont de Québec pourrait être démoli. Je ne sais pas si vous avez vu ça. Là. Après ça, la semaine passée, j'ai parlé à M. Legault. J'ai demandé s'il y avait eu effectivement une proposition que 2 voies sur le pont Pierre-Laporte pourraient être fermées. Il m'a dit non. Enquête de Radio-Canada a prouvé que oui, il y a eu des discussions, il y a eu même des échanges de courrieurs. Et aujourd'hui, il nous dit qu'il n'y a pas...
Il s'est pas sécuritaire.
Je ne fais pas peur au monde. Pourquoi ils ont enlevé tous les équipements sur le pont, M. Legault?
Monsieur Legault, moi, j'en ai une petite, puis après, je vous jure, je vous donne les paroles à tout le monde. Si votre étude montre que c'est un pont la meilleure option, est-ce que vous dites, tant pis, je vais quand même en tunnel?
Bien, écoutez, détruire le paysage d'une des plus belles villes au monde,
les pylônes
la ville de Québec,
ça a l'air.
Détruire l'île d'Orléans avec une autoroute, c'est pas une bonne idée.
Ça l'était.
À vous, Mme Anglade.
Mais c'est ça le problème, M. Legault. C'est que peu importe ce que la science vous dit, vous avez décidé que vous allez dans une direction. Ça fait 4 ans. Ça fait 4 ans qu'ils sont au gouvernement et il n'y a aucune étude qui a été rendue publique. Il y en a des études. Il y en a des études qui ont été faites, mais on ne les voit pas, on nous les cache. Puis c'est ça l'enjeu par rapport au 3e lien, c'est que personne ne sait où on s'en va.
Monsieur Legault, vous avez dit que les études que vous avez, que vous cachez aux Québécois, vous ne voulez pas les montrer parce qu'ils sont périmés, parce que c'était avant la crise sanitaire. Vous avez dit ça, on a entendu ça. Les études qui ont été faites pour le tramway, elles sont aussi périmées parce qu'il y a 30 de moins d'usagers dans les autobus à Québec présentement. Est-ce que vous allez remettre le projet de tramway sur la glace en attendant le renouvellement de nouvelles études? Ou si ça, c'est pas pareil parce que le tramway, vous êtes pauvre, puis alors que le 3e lien, vous voulez faire languir la population?
D'abord, les études sur le 3e lien, c'était un lien à l'est avec 6 voies.
C'est notre projet d'aujourd'hui.
Avec 6 voies.
C'est ça qu'on propose.
Nous, ce qu'on propose, c'est un tunnel avec 4 voies, dont 2 voies aux heures de pointe, qui sont pour le transport collectif. Plutôt que de prendre 30 minutes, ça va prendre 10 minutes. Pour ce qui est du tramway, bien, écoutez, d'une grande ville comme Québec, là, on a besoin
donc, les études, c'est pas important. On a la mise à jour post-pandémie, c'est pas importante.
We talk about $17.4 billion in untendered contract that he gave away from probably friends to friends, but that is during the pandemic and before the pandemic, when he was not allowed to give some untendered contract because the health emergency gave him the power to give contract without appealing. But he was doing that way before. So my point of view is like, why is not accountable of that?
It's the way fascist dictators work. I don't want to use like hyperbolic. It's the way tyrants work. They know best, and they don't need to follow the rules. And when they don't follow the rules, they'll somehow concoct a reason for why they didn't follow the rules or why it didn't apply. I read the article. You sent a study, an article showing that, admittedly, the the no-bid contracts doubled during the pandemic. They doubled under the guise of responding to a health emergency, even though many of the contracts had nothing to do with the health emergency. And whether or not he's contracting these things to his friends, they'll certainly become friends after they get uncompetitive contracts without going to public bids. Billions. It doubled in 2020, doubled in 2021 compared to the years before. But I'm sure he'll find a reason, and he'll get a study to show that it was the right decision at the time, even if it means getting that study after the decision has been made by all accounts. Let me rephrase that. Saying that they have the study, saying that they found the solution, but not disclosing the study, leaves some room to guess that they're going to prepare a study around the conclusion that they want to get to. But it's been a sign of this government to just grant contracts, non-competitive contracts. But it's the way the government has worked in total non-transparency, and to get to whatever conclusions they want to get to.
This is actually the problem with the government now. The transparency is not there. We ask we do some access to information, but all of it is lined with black on it we have no access to anything. And government should be transparent, especially because they use our money to pay all of this.
Alexa, it's obvious. You get. I don't know what requests, public access documents you've requested, but yeah, it's our money. They're using it to fund studies to determine policy. It's inconceivable and it's unjustifiable. It's untenable to say I'm not disclosing what you paid for to you. It's client work. It's like someone paid their lawyer prepared something and said, I'm not giving it to you. I'm sorry, that was my money that you used to prepare that. It belongs to me. And you don't get to say, as the government, what I have access to that you have prepared with our funds.
Yeah. And so far, what I retain of all this debate, because I was comparing a little bit with the first one, who was completely chaotic. Everybody was cutting the voice of everybody. Now it was more I would say proper, but I would say Liberal unfortunately didn't perform well. She didn't take much space. She didn't really show much that she already showed at the first debate. I would say Paul Saint-Pierre, Paul Lamondon, Quebec Party, they really play on sovereignty, independence of Quebec. People, it's way over that. They don't want it. Not anymore. We have so much other problem as inflation, as a trouble with worker. We don't have it. We have a big lack of worker. We have problem in the economy, and so many places education and health. Then doing a referendum on sovereignty, it's not the time.
It was and I forget his name now, but sovereignty was the solution to everything. It was the solution to energy. It was the solution to inflation. I appreciate the sentiment. I tend to think breaking up a country that's existed for hundreds of years is different than creating a union that hasn't existed for hundreds of years. So while I can understand people pulling out of the European Union, that's a relatively new creation. The idea of breaking up Canada, especially given what policy actually exists to preserve the linguistic and historical uniqueness that is Quebec. Sovereignty is not going to fix inflation. It'll probably just make things much worse. It's not going to fix energy independence. It'll make what it might fix is environmental issues, because it might turn the province-turned country into a hermit nation that doesn't need to worry about emissions anymore because they have to figure out how to feed themselves. So the sovereignty as a solution to everything is terrible policy. It might appeal to a few people. I just say from a demeanor perspective, Anglade came off well. From a policy perspective, it was a little vapid. The separation being a solution to everything is a problem. Duhaime, everybody knows I by and large agree with a lot of what he says, so I'm biased. But Legault You know, that episode of The Simpsons when Mayor Quimby was running for office and someone asked him a question and he answered it so badly, they inserted flames around his head and he was sweating. And they made a joke like, Legault came off so badly last night, it was almost meme-worthy. His fake smile, he couldn't keep his fake smile. He looked nervous. He looked uncomfortable. He came off belligerent. He came off as deflecting clear answers to totally different subjects. And I mean, unless I'm just hypercritical, but anybody watching that, I think, would come to the conclusion that Legault looked like a frantic, flailing loser who couldn't defend his own policy and just resorted to the most idiotic attacks on all of his ideological adversaries. And
especially like when Mr. Duhem say, for you study, which company is doing it? What is the amount of money do you spend? And it didn't have any answer. And I was like, but you're the premier of Quebec. You should have known that small, at least, information.
It's like he didn't know who, he didn't know how much, but he knows the solution. I mean, it's like he didn't ask. He didn't think anyone was going to ask him to show his homework. It's the way, you know, people who have ruled for 2.5 years without being able to be questioned think. You know, imagine for 2.5 years, Legault didn't have to justify any policy that he implemented in Quebec. And so all of a sudden now he's being asked to justify. It's like, wait, this isn't the rules. I thought I just get to, you know, issue public health emergency orders and no one gets to debate, challenge, or ask me to show my homework. Now he did. It was terrible. It was embarrassing, but it was also, you know, fun to watch.
So the last word is to you. I know you left Quebec. So what did you actually
temporarily?
Thought?
I'm not an American citizen. I'm a Canadian citizen. I'm on a visa. My plan is not to, you know, I had an opportunity in Florida and it was a good one. But what are my thoughts? I mean, we'll see. Look, Canada does not have much time to save itself from the current direction in which it's heading. So at a federal level, there's not much time. And I'm not saying this like from a environmental sort of panic mode. Politically speaking, we're getting to what many feel to be a point of no return. If Legault gets reelected, and he will get to run around saying, you, by reelecting me, have ratified my last 2.5 years of charter violations, in my humble opinion, human rights abuses, in my humble opinion. If he gets reelected, I don't know what the future of Quebec is going to be. From a policy going forward and from a ratification of abuse going backwards. The question is, what are the, you know, who are the alternatives? Other than separation being the dividing issue or the distinguishing issue between, it's not Quebec, Parti Québec, oh geez, I'm sorry. I'm getting mixed up on the names, but the separatist party.
Quebec Party.
I keep getting mixed up also. I mean, other than separation being one of the main policy issues, they're just talking about who's going to spend what money and in what proportion. Éric Duhem, whether you agree with his policy or not, the Conservative Party, it's the only one that's proposing anything meaningfully different from the other four. I happen to think it's meaningfully right. And there has to be some account for what has been done over the last 3 years and some proper solutions going forward. And the proper solutions going forward are not making excuses in 2022. Oh, mais ça prend du temps pour former les infirmières. Oh, thank you, Legault. I mean, I think children had that foresight 10 years ago. So other than excuses and promises to spend more private sector tax dollars, there's not much that separates the four major parties other than separation. But, you know, if we don't have a party in Quebec that steps in and says, we have rights, we need to be responsible, and we need to rein in the big government that has largely been a problem and the cause of a lot of these problems, Quebec will reap what it sows, as will the rest of Canada.
So we will wish that we have this time a strong opposition and not a fake opposition that we stand against Legault, because it seems that Mr. Legault will be re-elected, unfortunately, because he have like all the elderly on his side. But it seems like maybe we will have like a conservative, maybe opposition, but that it's to see.
There has been no opposition for the last 3 years. I forget which. There was one policy, one law, and I think it might have been the only piece of legislation that the government found time to pass, which was banning protest outside of hospitals, but banning protest only for COVID measures. What if they have one member opposing that? I mean, you have no different parties when everybody agrees on thorny issues like where and when you get to protest and what you get to protest against and what you don't. But hopefully there'll be some. Look, I'm an eternal optimist, even though it burns me sometimes. Maybe there'll be some radical change. But at the very least, may there be some meaningful opposition. Otherwise, it's going to be more of the same on steroids.
As you can see, we want to follow what is going on with the Quebec election, and we want to follow all the politicians to ask them questions. If you want to see all our report, you can do so at quebecelection.ca. And as well, you can chip in generously so we can continue to do our honest journalism. Thank you very much.